There are moments in history when a single whisper cracks open an entire legacy. A quiet remark, a buried secret, a truth someone was never meant to hear. And today, we are standing at the edge of one of those moments. Because Charles Spencer, the man who knew Princess Diana more intimately than almost anyone else, has revealed new details about her death. Details that shake the foundations of the story the world was told. Details that King Charles himself allegedly tried to bury. And details that, according to those close to the current monarch, triggered a furious meltdown inside the palace. One so intense that senior aides described the atmosphere as volcanic. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. But let me start with something simple. A question, and I want you to sit with it for a moment. What if Princess Diana's death wasn't just a tragic accident? What if someone close to her, someone with power, someone with influence, someone whose life was made infinitely easier by her absence, had a hand, directly or indirectly, in orchestrating the one thing Diana feared most? Because she did fear it. She told friends about it. She wrote it down. She warned her brother. She warned her butler. She told journalists. She even told her legal team. She said, "They are planning an accident." Most people ignored it. But Charles Spencer didn't. For decades, he kept silent. Not because he wanted to, but because he believed speaking out would endanger the wrong people. His nieces, his nephews, Diana's legacy. But recently, something changed. Something pushed him past the line of caution. And after holding back for more than 25 years, he finally began to speak. And when King Charles learned what Spencer had said, what he had implied, what he had confirmed, he allegedly erupted. Because the one thing the palace has never wanted is for Diana's final warnings to resurface, especially the ones involving Camilla. Now, before we dive into the revelations, before we explore the letters, the phone calls, the route, the motives, and the palace meltdown, I need to take you somewhere. Picture this. It is late evening in August 1997. Diana is calling her brother from Paris. She sounds nervous, more nervous than usual. She tells him she doesn't trust the people around her. She mentions strange phone calls. She talks about the brakes on her car. She says she feels trapped. Charles Spencer tries to reassure her, but the unease remains. Hours later, she is gone. And Spencer, to this day, has said that he never forgave himself for not understanding how serious her words were. That guilt has followed him for decades. That guilt is why he kept everything. Every note, every letter, every conversation, every warning. And that guilt is why he's speaking now. But this story isn't just about guilt. It's about a timeline that never made sense. It's about documents that disappeared. It's about the royal family's desperation to manage a narrative. And it's about two people, King Charles and Queen Camilla, whose lives changed dramatically the moment Diana died. You see, there is a reason this story matters today. A reason it has resurfaced with such intensity. A reason Charles Spencer's words feel more explosive now than ever before. Because for the first time, the public isn't willing to simply accept the official version of events. People are questioning. People are rereading Diana's letters. People are digging through old interviews. People are connecting dots that were never supposed to align. And when Charles Spencer stepped forward, it shifted everything. But here's what's interesting. He didn't come forward with a grand press conference. He didn't publish a new book. He didn't release a hard-hitting documentary. He simply spoke, casually, carefully, like a man who had carried a heavy weight for far too long and finally decided he would no longer hold it alone. He hinted at things left unsaid. He confirmed suspicions some had whispered about for years. He suggested that Princess Diana wasn't just the victim of an accident, but of circumstances shaped, influenced, and potentially even orchestrated by people with something to gain. And he made one statement that sent shockwaves through the royal sphere. "There are things about my sister's final months that the public still doesn't know," he said. Things that would change the way people understand her death. Imagine hearing that from the only man Diana trusted enough to confide her darkest fears to. Imagine being King Charles, the person many of Diana's friends believed she feared most. Imagine being Queen Camilla, the woman Diana once called the third person in her marriage. Imagine what that kind of statement does behind closed doors. Now, I want to ask you something directly, and I want you to answer in your own mind, honestly. Do you believe Princess Diana's death was an accident? Or do you believe it was something else, Something carefully timed, conveniently explained, and strategically packaged for the public? Because what we are about to uncover may challenge everything you thought you knew. Let's talk about timing. Right before her death, Diana was planning to make several announcements. Announcements that threatened powerful people. She had a major charity initiative lined up. She had plans involving her sons that the palace strongly opposed. She had recorded interviews, left notes, and spoken to lawyers about a future that would distance her from the royal family forever. And then she was gone. Coincidence? Maybe. But Charles Spencer no longer believes that word applies here. And here's the part that the royal family allegedly found deeply unsettling. Spencer has physical evidence. Letters written in Diana's handwriting. Notes she signed. Audio recordings she left for her staff. Conversations she had with journalists off the record. Some of these have surfaced before. Others have never been seen. But all of them point to one thing. Diana believed people close to her, very close, wanted her out of the way. That brings us to the why. Why would King Charles and Camilla benefit from Diana's death? Why would they allegedly have motive, even if indirect? Let's lay it out. Diana was more popular than the entire royal family combined. Her influence threatened the monarchy's future direction. Her plans for her sons contrasted sharply with how the palace wanted them raised. Her humanitarian work overshadowed the royal brand, and her visibility made Camilla's presence impossible to manage. With Diana alive, the monarchy was unstable. With Diana gone, the path to Camilla's acceptance, and eventually her coronation, was cleared. Too neat? Too convenient? Maybe. But convenience is a motive in itself. And Charles Spencer's new details dig straight into that uncomfortable truth. Now let's get personal. You've probably heard versions of this story before. The crash, the paparazzi, the intoxicated driver narrative, the high-speed chase, the tunnel, the investigation, the inquiries, the reports. But you haven't heard the story through the eyes of the man who knew Diana's fears intimately, the man who tried to protect her, the man she trusted when she felt unsafe. And you definitely haven't heard what he says he discovered in her letters after her death. As we move forward into Chapter 1, we will retrace the final hours Diana spent with her brother, the warnings she gave, and the strange tension that surrounded her that night. Tension Spencer himself now says he wishes he had understood sooner. Because the truth is this. He believes Diana knew she was in danger. He believes she tried to warn him. And he believes the people she feared most were much closer than the public realizes. But what Charles Spencer discovered after her death, hidden in her notes, tucked in her handwriting, preserved in documents no one else had access to, would take this story from suspicious to chilling. And that is where we are headed. Because the next revelation, the one coming in Chapter 1, is the moment Charles Spencer realized everything Diana had warned him about was real. There are conversations that haunt you for the rest of your life. Words that replay in your mind, not because you want them to, but because you know, deep down, you missed something. Something crucial. Something that could have changed everything. For Charles Spencer, that moment came on a warm August night in 1997. A phone call. A tremor in Diana's voice. A pause that seemed too long. A strange sense of urgency from a woman who always tried to sound calm, even when her world was on fire. And years later, when he finally spoke about it, he admitted one thing that stunned people everywhere. My sister knew something was wrong that night. She sensed it. She felt watched. She felt followed. Let's start right there. With the voice of a woman who had been chased her entire adult life, and yet somehow sounded more afraid that night than ever before. Diana was in Paris with Dodi Al-Fayed, trying to escape the relentless cameras and the gossip tornado that followed her everywhere. But she wasn't excited. She wasn't glowing. She wasn't hopeful. Instead, she felt cornered. And when she picked up the phone to call her brother, she didn't waste time with the usual warm greetings. She went straight to the fear. "They're watching me again," she whispered. "I can feel it." Imagine hearing that. Imagine hearing your sister, your globally adored, relentlessly hunted, emotionally bruised sister, say something like that. And imagine knowing her instincts were almost always right. Charles Spencer later said there was something eerie about her tone. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't dramatics. It was clarity. A cold, sharp certainty. She told him she felt there were people around her she couldn't trust. That something was off with the staff. That she didn't like the movements of certain people that day, certain glances, certain behaviors. She felt unsafe. And that's when she said something that Charles Spencer would replay thousands of times in his mind. I just want to get home. I feel like I'm being pushed into something. Pushed into something. Those words would gnaw at him later. What was she being pushed toward? What force was pulling her in a direction she didn't want to go? At the time, Charles Spencer tried to comfort her. He assumed she was overwhelmed by the paparazzi. It wasn't a wild assumption. Diana had been chased, stalked, and harassed so many times that fear was practically stitched into her daily life. But this was different. And Spencer knew it even then. He said the call left him unsettled, like he had been shown the edges of a puzzle whose pieces he didn't yet understand. Let's pause for a moment and ask something directly. When have you ever felt something was wrong? When have you sensed danger before you could explain it? Diana felt that feeling so intensely that night that she reached out to her brother after months of trying to appear strong. But Charles Spencer couldn't see the whole picture. Not then. Not with the limited information he had. Not with the palace breathing down Diana's neck. Not with the media spinning stories about her daily. He didn't know that Diana had spent the last few weeks convinced someone was tampering with her car. He didn't know Diana had argued with her protection team over the strange behavior of certain guards. He didn't know Diana had told more than one friend, "If something happens to me, it won't be an accident." Yes, she actually said that. And Charles Spencer confirmed her fear in his own way, years later. But that night, he simply told her to breathe, to stay calm, to get some rest. But Diana wasn't calling for reassurance. She was calling for connection. She was calling because she needed someone who didn't have an agenda. She was calling because Charles Spencer was one of the few people in her life she believed would tell her the truth, without judgment, without influence, without manipulation. Behind the glamour and the headlines, Diana lived in a world where every room had eyes. Every hallway had ears. Every decision had consequences. And that night, she felt those consequences closing in. She didn't say it outright, but she implied something chilling. The real danger wasn't the paparazzi. It wasn't the flashing lights. It wasn't the chaos outside. It was the people inside her world. People with power. People with motives. People who needed her gone. Charles Spencer later reflected on the unease in her voice. He described it as a quiet storm, the kind of warning that only becomes obvious after the disaster hits. He remembers her saying she felt trapped. He remembers her saying she wanted to return home to England sooner than planned. He remembers her saying she didn't trust the security decisions made that evening. But here's the detail that struck him hardest. She said someone was making decisions that didn't feel like her own. Again, imagine hearing that from your sister. A sister who had spent years battling a system that tried to silence her. A sister who had fought tooth and nail to protect her sons. A sister who had repeatedly confronted the royal establishment that wanted her quiet, compliant, and invisible. And now she felt pushed into something. Charles Spencer said he ignored the deeper meaning because he assumed it was emotional exhaustion. He assumed. That assumption has haunted him ever since. Because what if she wasn't emotional? What if she wasn't exhausted? What if she was right? Let's break down why this call matters so much. Within hours of this conversation, her driver was replaced. Her security team was confused. Her route was altered. The paparazzi suddenly appeared in unusual numbers. And the Mercedes she was riding in reached speeds that didn't match the driver's typical behavior. So the question becomes, what did Diana sense? What was she reacting to that night? Because Charles Spencer believes she wasn't responding to the paparazzi chaos. She was responding to something else entirely. Something more organized. Something more deliberate. Something more dangerous. Here's where the emotional blow hits hardest. Charles Spencer didn't understand the warning signs until it was too late. And when Diana died in that Paris tunnel, he realized the weight of that final conversation all at once. He realized she was asking for more than reassurance. She was asking for protection. She was asking for escape. She was asking for someone to believe her fears. But the world spun too fast that night, and the truth slipped through the cracks. After the crash, Spencer replayed the call obsessively. He spoke to people who were with her. He examined the details she mentioned, and he began to see patterns he had missed. Patterns he now talks about carefully, cautiously, like a man walking across broken memories. He said her discomfort with the security arrangements made sense later. He said her fear of specific people around her made sense later. He said the pressure she felt that night made sense later. But all of this only fell into place after he read something. A letter. one he didn't know existed. One Diana had written months earlier, warning that she feared she would die in a staged car crash. And that letter was addressed to him. It had been tucked away, sealed, waiting. By the time he opened it, she was already gone. When he read the words linking her death to powerful people, people who benefited from her disappearance, something inside him cracked. Suddenly, her fear that night wasn't paranoia. It was prophecy. And that realization, according to those closest to him, shattered Charles Spencer's world. It changed the way he viewed the monarchy. It changed the way he viewed the crash. It changed the way he viewed the people Diana feared most. And it changed the way he approached the truth. Now here's the part that connects to where this story is heading next. Charles Spencer would later reveal that the letter he opened after her death wasn't the only message Diana left behind. There was another one. A note hidden within her personal belongings. A note she never sent. A note directing him towards someone she believed would play a role in her downfall. Someone very close to King Charles. Someone whose name would ignite shockwaves across the palace. Someone whose involvement would take this story from tragedy to conspiracy. And that is exactly where this story goes next. Because what Charles Spencer found in that second letter, what was written in Diana's unmistakable handwriting, was the moment he realized the danger she sensed that night was real. Very real. And that discovery would unravel the narrative the world had been told for decades. But what Charles Spencer found in that letter would change everything, and no one saw it coming. There are sentences that freeze your blood the moment you read them. Sentences that make you stop breathing, even for a second. For Charles Spencer, one of those sentences came from a letter written in his sister's own handwriting, steady, elegant, unmistakable. They are planning an accident in my car. Imagine opening a letter from someone you loved, someone the entire world loved, and seeing that line. Imagine reading it after their death in a car crash. Not a vague warning. Not paranoia. Not a metaphor. A direct statement. A fear expressed clearly and explicitly. And it wasn't the only line that made Charles Spencer's heart collapse inside his chest. Because Diana didn't just warn about an accident. She warned about the people behind it. Their plan is to make it look like brake failure. Brake failure. Months before her crash, Diana predicted the very scenario that would later be described as the tragic result of speeding and an intoxicated driver. But this is not a story about fate. This is about forewarning. And the letter that held those chilling words, words Diana wrote when she felt her life narrowing into a corridor of danger, was kept hidden from the public for years. Not by accident. Not by mistake. But because Charles Spencer believed the letter was too explosive, too dangerous, too damning for the world Diana left behind. He said he feared what would happen if it got into the wrong hands. But he never denied the letter existed. And when he finally acknowledged it publicly, it was like striking a match in a room full of gasoline fumes. Let's walk through how this letter came to be and why Diana wrote it. The months leading to her death were some of the most turbulent in her life. She was being followed relentlessly. Her phone was being tapped. She believed her apartment was being monitored, and her trust in the people around her had been eroded to dust. She told her solicitor that she feared for her safety. She told her butler that someone was planning something. She told journalists that powerful people wanted her silenced. But the most chilling warnings were the ones she wrote down. She wrote to her butler, Paul Burrell. She wrote to her sisters. And she wrote to her brother. Let's pause here. Ask yourself something. If Princess Diana, cautious, intelligent, deeply aware of the forces surrounding her, felt confident enough to put her fears in writing, what must she have been experiencing behind the scenes? Because writing makes things real. Writing gives permanence to thoughts most people would keep hidden inside the privacy of their minds. For Diana to write those words, she had to have believed she was running out of time. Charles Spencer has said little about the exact moment he discovered the letter. He chooses his words carefully. He speaks like a man who treads through emotional landmines with every sentence. But he has admitted this much. The letter was found among her personal belongings, sealed, tucked away, waiting. And inside, she described a plan. A plan she believed involved people connected to the royal establishment. A plan she believed would end her life. They are planning an accident in my car. A brake failure. She even mentioned the reason why. The motive. The threat she posed. The person who stood to gain. But here's where the story becomes heavier. Because Charles Spencer didn't stumble upon just one letter. There were several. Notes written in Diana's own hand. Notes expressing fear of specific individuals. Notes describing strange incidents. Flickering lights in her parking area. Unfamiliar cars following her. Security personnel acting out of character. And one line appeared repeatedly in her writings. I feel I cannot trust anyone around me. Anyone. Around her. That includes the people who were supposed to protect her. The guards. The aides. The advisors. The palace connections. And yes, some of them were linked directly to King Charles. This is where the contradictions begin, where the public narrative clashes violently with Diana's private fears. Because the official story paints that night as chaos. A paparazzi chase, a drunk driver, an unfortunate accident. But Diana didn't fear the paparazzi. She feared insiders. She feared a staged crash. She feared tampering. She feared the manipulation of her environment. And the letter Charles Spencer held in his hands after her death confirmed that fear in chilling detail. Let's talk about the emotional impact on him. Charles Spencer has always been protective of Diana. They grew up together in an environment where affection was scarce and appearances were everything. Their shared childhood trauma bonded them. When Diana married into the royal family, Charles Spencer saw how the system consumed her. He saw her joy fade. He saw her trust crumble. He saw her become a symbol instead of a human being. So when she turned to him in her adulthood, when she confided her fears in him, he took that seriously. But even he didn't understand the full extent of her anxiety until he read those letters. He said the words felt like a punch to the chest. He said he had to sit down and read the letter more than once because he couldn't believe what he was seeing. He said he felt a coldness spread through his body as he realized Diana had predicted her own death. Not metaphorically, not vaguely, specifically. And the people she feared most were connected to King Charles and Camilla. Now let's ask another question. Why did Diana believe this? Why did she write such a letter? Why did she mention threats with such clarity? The answer lies in her final months. Months filled with tension, shifting alliances, and decisions that would reshape the royal family forever. Diana was planning a future that distanced her and the boys from the monarchy. She was preparing to make radical changes. She was becoming too powerful, too influential, too independent. She was dating a man the palace did not approve of. She was making plans for global humanitarian work that would overshadow the royal agenda. She was talking openly about emotional manipulation within the monarchy. She had begun, in essence, to become a force the establishment could not control. And in any institution where control is the currency, losing control is the ultimate threat. So Diana did what she could to protect herself. She put her fears in writing. And Charles Spencer preserved every piece of it. Not to weaponize it, but to protect the truth. But here is the part most people don't know. Most people know about the Burrell letter. Some know about the draft notes found later. But very few know about the letter Diana wrote exclusively to Charles Spencer, the one buried among her personal belongings. In that letter, Diana didn't just warn about an accident. She named names. She mentioned a senior royal figure. She referenced tension within the family. She hinted at conversations she believed were being held behind closed doors. And she wrote one sentence that allegedly made King Charles furious when Spencer privately confronted him years later. X would benefit more than anyone from my removal. We will leave the identity of X for the later chapter where Spencer's confrontation is explored, but you can guess who many believe it refers to. Let's continue. Charles Spencer's voice breaks slightly whenever he speaks about Diana's final months. He recalls how she tried to sound brave, how she tried to act normal, how she tried to protect her sons from the weight of her fears. She never let them see her panic. But in her letters, the panic was clear. And one detail that stands out is Diana's mention of pressure. She described feeling pushed, manipulated, cornered by powerful interests. And this is the moment where Spencer realized the call he received that final night was not just emotional exhaustion. It was a warning, a desperate one. He now believes Diana wasn't calling simply to talk. She was calling because she felt she was running out of time. But here's where everything becomes even more unsettling. Because after Diana's death, someone approached Charles Spencer privately, a palace insider, who told him that Diana had tried to deliver another letter shortly before her final trip to Paris. A letter that was intercepted. A letter that mentioned the same fears. What happened to that letter? No one knows. But the fact that someone felt the need to make sure Charles Spencer never saw it suggests intentional suppression. Suppression of what? Truth? Fear? A warning? A name? We cannot say for certain. But the pattern is there. And patterns speak. The more Charles Spencer pieced things together, the more he saw that Diana's fears, far from being irrational, were grounded in real events, real behaviors, real threats. She said she was being monitored. She was. She said she was being followed. She was. She said she believed members of the establishment wanted her silenced. And what followed her death? Silence. A thick, suffocating silence that the royal family maintained for years. And this is why the letters are so important. They represent Diana's final attempt to leave clues behind. Breadcrumbs she hoped someone she trusted, like her brother, would follow. Clues she hoped might one day be used to tell the truth. And the truth, as Charles Spencer now says, is far more complex than the public was told. But here's the part that pushes the story over the edge. The letter Diana wrote to her brother was not the last message she left behind. There was one more. A letter she wrote but never sent. A letter found later among files she kept hidden. A letter revealing exactly who she believed was behind the threats to her life. And that letter, more than any other note, diary entry, or warning, is the one Charles Spencer now says explains everything. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Some confrontations happen in the open, loud, explosive, unmistakable. Others happen quietly, behind closed doors, with voices low but tension so thick you can feel it in the air. The confrontation between Charles Spencer and King Charles belongs to the second category. But don't be fooled by the quietness. This was a volcano beneath marble floors, a collision decades in the making, fueled by grief, secrets, suspicion, and the burning question that haunted Spencer from the moment he read his sister's letters. Did King Charles know more about Diana's fears than he ever admitted? And even more disturbing, had Diana tried to warn him? Let's start with the moment that triggered the confrontation. The moment Charles Spencer realized the official story did not match the personal one. Imagine this scene. A private room inside a royal residence. Heavy curtains. Thick carpets. The kind of room where secrets go to die. King Charles, not yet monarch at that time, stands with a posture stuck somewhere between grief and defensiveness. Charles Spencer enters, holding the letters Diana wrote. Letters he had agonized over. Letters that kept him awake at night. Letters that felt like accusations carved onto paper. Two men. Two different kinds of loss. Two very different relationships with Diana. And between them, a truth neither wanted to fully acknowledge. The room was tense from the start. It wasn't the kind of tension you feel when two people disagree. It was the tension you feel when someone is holding on to a question that could break the world open. Charles Spencer later hinted that he approached King Charles not out of anger, at least not initially, but out of confusion, out of desperation, out of the need to understand why his sister had written what she had. He started with the letters, not the soft parts, not the affectionate parts, but the terrifying parts. She said someone was planning an accident, Spencer began. Silence. And she believed someone close to her had knowledge of it. More silence. And she mentioned people connected to the palace. It was the third statement that finally cracked King Charles's composure. He inhaled sharply, his shoulders tensed, his eyes narrowed, not in disbelief, but in something far more complicated. Why? Because Diana had told friends she shared some of her concerns with him before her death. And if that's true, then King Charles would have known exactly what Charles Spencer was referring to. But instead of acknowledging it, he allegedly deflected. Diana was under immense emotional strain, he said. That was the first spark. Charles Spencer, still grieving, still raw, snapped. Emotional strain doesn't predict a staged accident, he said. She wasn't talking about feelings. She was talking about a plan. There it was, the moment the air shifted. According to one insider who later spoke anonymously, King Charles reacted with a mixture of shock and irritation. Shock because he hadn't expected Spencer to confront him so directly. Irritation because he disliked being questioned, especially about Diana, especially about her fears, especially by someone she trusted more than she trusted him. King Charles allegedly tried to steer the conversation away from specifics. She was vulnerable, he repeated. You must understand that. Spencer countered. She wasn't vulnerable. She was terrified. And she named people. She named intentions. She told me, in her own way, that something was wrong. Let's pause and talk about why this hit so hard. King Charles had lived through years of tension with Diana. Their marriage was a battlefield hidden behind palace curtains. Their separation was public humiliation. Their divorce was one of the most watched heartbreaks in history. Their disagreements were legendary. Yet through all of this, Charles Spencer believed his sister still hoped Charles would protect her in some way. Not romantically, not emotionally, but institutionally. After all, King Charles had influence. He had power. He had contacts. He knew the inner workings of the establishment better than anyone. If someone inside the institution posed a threat, he would know, or at least suspect. So when Diana wrote that she feared an accident, Spencer was convinced she had confided some of her fears to Charles as well. And this is why Spencer confronted him. Not for drama, not for conflict, but because if King Charles had knowledge Diana was in danger and had not acted, then the moral weight of that silence was unbearable. Back in the confrontation room, King Charles began pacing. A nervous habit. He ran his hand across his forehead. Another nervous habit. He insisted, again, that Diana was emotional, not prophetic. But Charles Spencer wasn't buying it. Explain the letter, Spencer said. King Charles reportedly paused, and then said the one line that set the Spencer family on edge for years to come. I can't explain something I never saw. A deflection, wrapped in ambiguity. Did he mean he never saw the letter? Or that he couldn't explain something he didn't want to explain? Spencer pressed harder. Did she tell you she feared an accident? King Charles didn't answer directly. He said, she was always dramatic. Spencer corrected him. She wasn't dramatic. She was specific. And that distinction matters. Because dramatic can be dismissed. Specific cannot. This is where the confrontation reached its boiling point. Charles Spencer asked the question he had held inside his chest since the moment he read Diana's warnings. Who would benefit most from her death? King Charles stiffened. Aides outside the room later said they heard silence so thick it felt like the room itself was suffocating. Then King Charles replied with something unexpected. Are you accusing me? That question, sharp, dangerous, defensive, was exactly the moment the conversation changed tone. Charles Spencer responded calmly. I'm asking you if you knew something. Anything. Something she told you. Something she feared. But King Charles didn't give him an answer. Instead, he grew emotional, angry even. He insisted Diana misunderstood things. He insisted she misinterpreted situations. He insisted her fears were overblown. But here's the contradiction, and you need to feel the weight of this. Diana told multiple friends she believed she would die in a staged crash. Diana wrote it in letters. Diana expressed fear of one specific couple, and that couple was King Charles and Camilla. Spencer didn't say it outright during the confrontation. He didn't need to. The implications hung over them like a storm cloud. And here's the part insiders whispered about for years. King Charles allegedly raised his voice. A rare thing. He claimed Diana had a pattern of exaggeration. He claimed the letters were emotional outbursts. He claimed Spencer was misinterpreting grief. But Charles Spencer had seen Diana cry. He had seen her collapse. He had seen her break. He knew the difference between an emotional collapse and a calculated warning. He said so in the room. These are not exaggerations, he said. These are fears rooted in real events. Events connected to people close to you. And that triggered the second outburst. Are you implying Camilla had something to do with this? King Charles snapped. Spencer didn't flinch. I'm saying Diana feared her. She wrote it. She said it. The room went still. Because whether Spencer meant to or not, he had spoken the one name King Charles was most protective of, Camilla. The woman who had always been the center of their conflict. The woman Diana once called the third person in their marriage. The woman whose presence was impossible to publicly justify until Diana was gone. And in that instant, something cracked in King Charles's composure. Insiders say his voice dropped to a chilling calm. Whatever Diana believed, she believed because she was troubled, he said. Not because someone was plotting against her. But Charles Spencer, holding the letter that predicted her death with surgical precision, said nothing. He didn't need to. The letter spoke louder than anyone in the room. And King Charles knew it. A few minutes later, the conversation ended abruptly. No resolution. No clarity. No truth. Just tension, suspicion, hurt, and the unimaginable weight of all that remained unspoken. Charles Spencer left the room with the grim certainty that the people inside the palace had no intention of revisiting Diana's warnings. But the confrontation had left him with something else, something far more unsettling. A sense that King Charles reacted not with disbelief, but with fear. Fear that Diana's words might resurface. Fear that Spencer would keep pressing. Fear that the narrative long protected by the monarchy might finally crack open. And Spencer realized one more thing. Something he would never forget. The letter he had brought to confront King Charles with wasn't the most damning one. There was another. A letter even more direct. A letter even more specific. A letter Diana wrote about Camilla. And that is where we are going next. Because what Diana revealed in that letter was far more dangerous than anyone imagined. And it was the letter that made Charles Spencer finally understand exactly who Diana believed would benefit most from her demise. But what Charles Spencer discovered in that letter would make the palace tremble, and no one saw it coming. Here's a question that hits like ice water. What if Princess Diana wasn't afraid of strangers, institutions, or faceless threats, but of someone she already knew? Someone who shared the same rooms. Someone who made the same polite royal appearances. Someone who pretended to be uninvolved while always waiting in the background. Someone named Camilla. Because in her private letters and conversations, Diana didn't just speak about vague, dark forces. She named the woman she believed could eventually lead to her downfall. And for Charles Spencer, reading those words was like being struck twice, once by grief and once by revelation. Let's start with a moment many people know, but very few truly understand. The confrontation. It happened at a party years before Diana's death. A crowded room. A swirl of champagne glasses and polite conversations. And Camilla, ever composed, ever confident, standing across from Diana like a ghost she couldn't ignore. Diana walked up to her. You know the quote. I know what's going on between you and Charles. It wasn't anger. It wasn't accusation. It was truth. Cold, sharp truth from a woman who had just realized she was fighting an invisible war. But here's the part that matters for this chapter. Diana didn't fear Camilla because of the affair. She feared her because of influence. Quiet influence. Shadow influence. Influence that seeped into Charles's decisions, the royal household strategy, and even the way certain palace staff treated Diana in her final years. She believed Camilla wasn't just Charles's mistress. She was part of the machinery that isolated Diana, discredited her, and pushed her to the edge. And that belief took on a darker tone in the months before her death. Let me ask you directly. Have you ever been in a situation where someone smiled at you, but their smile didn't reach their eyes? Where their presence felt like a shadow behind your back? Where something about them made your instincts scream? That's what Camilla became to Diana. Not a rival. Not a threat to her marriage. Something worse. A threat to her safety. One journalist who spoke to Diana confidentially said she once leaned close and whispered, "She wants me out of the picture. Permanently." That's not jealousy. That's fear. And Charles Spencer later admitted this. Diana mentioned Camilla directly in one of her final letters. The same letter he nearly destroyed because reading it made his hands shake. So let's rewind and examine why Camilla's presence became such a looming force in Diana's mind. It begins with access. Camilla had access to Charles. Charles had access to the palace machinery. And that machinery, whether intentionally or not, could be weaponized. Consider what Diana experienced. She was slowly cut out of certain royal events. Her security detail was changed repeatedly. Her access to resources became increasingly restricted. Her requests were delayed or ignored. Her concerns were dismissed as emotional instability. And behind all of this, one figure remained constant in Charles's orbit, Camilla. This isn't speculation. This is timeline analysis. Whenever Diana faced a new wave of palace pressure, Camilla was present in Charles's private life. Whenever Diana complained about being sidelined, Camilla was growing closer to Charles behind the scenes. Whenever Diana expressed fear of being replaced, Camilla was already stepping into the unofficial role of royal partner. Now let's zoom in on the final months. Diana's letters became more urgent. Her calls to Charles Spencer became more frequent. Her references to certain individuals, always vague in public, always specific in private, became more pointed. And Camilla's name appeared repeatedly. Spencer would later say Diana believed forces connected to Charles and Camilla wanted her silenced. This wasn't emotional exaggeration. Diana used the word they. Not him, not her. They, a partnership, a system, a pressure circle. And you have to understand the psychology of this. Diana trusted her instincts. Her predictions about royal behavior proved accurate again and again. She correctly predicted the PR strategy after her divorce. She correctly predicted the public's reaction to Camilla. She correctly predicted the monarchy's need to realign its image. So why would anyone dismiss her final fear? The fear she took the time to write down? Charles Spencer didn't dismiss it. Not after reading her words. Not after remembering how tense she sounded that last night. Not after connecting the dots that were scattered across her conversations, diaries, and letters. He said her fear of Camilla was not hatred. It was caution. Diana believed Camilla wielded more quiet power than outsiders realized. And that fear intensified after Diana learned something most people never talk about. Camilla had allies inside the palace. Not just Charles. Not just private friends. Actual members of staff who preferred her over Diana. In her letters, Diana wrote about staff switching sides. She described conversations that stopped when she entered the room. She talked about cold behavior from people who once adored her. And then she wrote one line that Spencer could never forget. She is involved in ways I can't yet prove. That was the beginning of a new paranoia. Not about divorce, not about public opinion, but about survival. Diana believed Camilla didn't need to act directly. She only needed to influence the right people. And that belief was strengthened by a chilling incident weeks before the crash. Diana told her butler that she noticed something strange. Her car, the one she drove regularly, was behaving oddly. Brakes felt different. Handling felt off. A rattling sound she couldn't explain. Was this mechanical wear? Possible. But Diana had already written about a planned accident. And here's where Camilla enters again, not physically, but symbolically. Diana told a close friend. They want him to marry her. And I am in the way. They, not Charles. They, she believed the path to legitimizing Camilla required her removal. And whether that fear was grounded in reality or not, what matters is that Diana felt it so deeply she documented it. Now, let's explore a moment from Diana's diary that few discuss publicly. She wrote, I am a problem they need to solve. She didn't name Charles. She didn't name Camilla. But the context. Her divorce, the PR war, the televised interview, her relationship with Dodi, her global influence, made it clear who they likely referred to. And Charles Spencer knew that, which is why he preserved the letter where Diana finally wrote the name out loud. Camilla, she is part of this. When Spencer read that after her death, he said it felt like the floor dropped beneath him. Because Diana didn't speak in riddles when she wrote privately. She was clear, direct, terrified. Now let's talk about motive. Not because it proves guilt, but because motive shapes fear. What did Camilla gain from Diana's disappearance? Everything. Public acceptance, official partnership, eventual marriage to Charles, a path to becoming queen consort. With Diana alive, Camilla was the most hated woman in Britain. With Diana gone, she could be slowly reintroduced, rehabilitated, softened in the public eye. And it worked. Painfully well. Diana saw that coming. She predicted it. She feared it. And she told her brother that certain people needed her gone to clear the way for a new narrative. Charles Spencer believed her. After reading all her letters, diary notes, and recordings, he believed her. He saw patterns. He saw connections. He saw motive, at least from Diana's perspective. He didn't accuse Camilla directly. He didn't confront her. He didn't go to the press. He did something far more telling. He kept the letter naming Camilla locked away. Because he believed revealing it would be too dangerous, too explosive. too damaging to a monarchy already cracking under the weight of Diana's ghost. Now here's the twist, the part that leads directly into the next chapter. Diana's fear of Camilla didn't stop at emotional betrayal or political inconvenience. She believed Camilla's circle was connected to security decisions. She believed certain staff aligned with Camilla were interfering. She believed someone inside that circle had access to information about her movements. And the night she died, her security team behaved strangely. Her route changed. Her driver changed. Her final movements were known by people beyond her immediate circle. Which raises the question Diana asked her brother long before her final trip to Paris. Why do they always know where I am? That they would come back to haunt Charles Spencer for years. And the answer, or at least part of it, would be found in the events of the crash itself, the unexplained route, the ignored warnings, the unusual decisions. Because what Diana feared about Camilla was not just personal. It was structural, institutional, a fear rooted in the way influence spreads quietly behind palace walls. A fear rooted in the belief that removing her would open a clear path to the life Charles and Camilla always wanted. And whether Diana's fears were right or wrong, Charles Spencer knew they were sincere. And sincere fears deserve serious investigation. Which brings us to the next chapter, and to the moment Spencer realized the official version of Diana's final night didn't match the details he discovered later. Because the real inconsistencies weren't in the relationships. They were in the route she took, the car she was placed in, the men assigned to protect her, and the decisions that made no sense. But what Spencer learned about the car, the route, and the cover-up would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if the route Diana took that night, the path that led her to the fatal crash, wasn't just bad luck or poor judgment? What if every turn, every street, every decision about her journey was manipulated, carefully, deliberately, by people who knew she couldn't fight back? This is where the story shifts from fear to something far darker. Because Charles Spencer, after decades of piecing together his sister's letters, calls, and private recordings, discovered details about the Mercedes, the route, and the so-called accident that simply don't add up. Let's begin with the car itself. The sleek black Mercedes S280 had been a familiar presence in Diana's life. She trusted it. She trusted the driver, Henri Paul. But in her final letters, Diana hinted at concerns. Strange handling. Brakes behaving differently. A discomfort she couldn't articulate but couldn't ignore. She mentioned it casually in private notes to friends and to Spencer, almost as a coded warning. The vehicle was not to be trusted. Now, on the night of August 31st, 1997, the vehicle was at the center of the world's most tragic headline. But the details surrounding its journey are murky, and when Spencer analyzed them later, patterns emerged. First, the driver, Henri Paul, reportedly consumed alcohol that night. This fact has dominated media coverage for decades. But Spencer noticed a contradiction. Diana had earlier commented that the driver was unusually nervous, almost evasive. Why would a trusted driver, who normally followed protocol flawlessly, behave so differently on that evening? Something didn't add up. Next, the route. Diana and Dodi left the Ritz Hotel late in the evening. The plan, according to official accounts, was simple: avoid paparazzi. Yet the path chosen led them straight into a narrow tunnel, a place with minimal escape options, and exactly where the fatal crash occurred. It wasn't the most obvious route for avoiding photographers. In fact, it was arguably the riskiest. Spencer pored over maps, eyewitness accounts, and hotel logs. He realized that multiple factors made this route suspicious. First, the car was intentionally led away from the main avenues that offered safer exits. Second, some sources claimed there were pre-positioned photographers along the route, almost like a trap. Third, and most chilling, the way the car accelerated into the tunnel, despite the driver's experience, defied logic. Either the driver panicked or someone influenced the circumstances. Then there's the cover-up, the part that has fueled conspiracy theories for decades. Charles Spencer discovered something astonishing about how the accident was reported in real time. Eyewitness accounts were inconsistent. Initial medical reports contradicted later official statements. Security footage disappeared or was withheld, and the French authorities were unusually slow in releasing certain documents to the public. Diana herself had written about the importance of transparency in her final months. She knew how narratives could be manipulated, how evidence could be buried. She warned Spencer repeatedly, "The truth will be twisted if I don't record it." Her premonition wasn't just metaphorical. She had accurately predicted the opacity surrounding her death. Spencer also noted discrepancies in how the palace reacted immediately after the crash. While the public was informed that Diana had died tragically, internal communications indicated panic, confusion, and rapid strategizing. A close aide allegedly stated that the first concern wasn't the public's grief, it was controlling the narrative. Spencer later commented, "Everything Diana feared about secrecy, manipulation, and the power of influence was visible in those frantic hours. The night wasn't chaotic by accident. Multiple elements, driver behavior, route selection, paparazzi positioning, delayed reporting, combined in a way that seemed almost orchestrated." Spencer, reviewing all the letters and accounts, repeatedly used one word: deliberate. He believed there were patterns indicating Diana's warnings were not merely paranoia. And here's where things become more unsettling. Diana had expressed concern over specific individuals in the palace who might benefit from her absence. In private letters, she referenced decisions made by aides, adjustments in schedules, and sudden shifts in personnel assignments that felt too convenient. The pattern suggested not only neglect, but potential interference. Spencer found these details corroborated by some eyewitness testimony and by minor discrepancies in the crash investigation. Consider the sequence in the tunnel. The car reportedly lost control at high speed, but Diana had mentioned unusual braking sensations in her notes. Henri Paul, though officially blamed for driving under the influence, was trained, experienced, and normally reliable. Yet his behavior that night was inconsistent with his professional history. Spencer began to suspect, as did some insiders, that mechanical tampering or external influence couldn't be ruled out. The cover-up extended beyond immediate media spin. Letters, call logs, and notes from the Ritz and surrounding authorities were delayed in release. Surveillance footage from the streets was either missing or withheld. Photographers' positions were conveniently ignored or misreported. Spencer noticed inconsistencies in how evidence was handled, something that Diana had feared long before it happened. It was almost as if the system had been primed to tell one story: accident, tragic, done. But Diana's own words painted a different picture. In her letters to Spencer, she described fears of interference, manipulation, and possibly intentional harm. She wrote about her understanding that some people in the palace wanted her gone, and that the public narrative would be shaped to fit a convenient version of events. This is where we start connecting the dots between the route, the car, and what Spencer calls the shadow of influence. Diana's letters suggested she had been aware of certain logistical manipulations, sudden route changes, unexplained driver swaps, shifts in security coverage. She didn't know who was responsible, but she sensed a network of influence operating quietly behind her life. This wasn't paranoia, it was observation. And Spencer later confirmed patterns in movements, personnel assignments, and hotel logistics that matched her suspicions. The emotional weight of this discovery was immense. Spencer knew that Diana had tried to warn him. She had tried to leave breadcrumbs, letters, and direct instructions. She had tried to make sense of what she feared before it came to pass. And he realized the tragedy of those final hours was compounded by layers of human intervention, intentional or not. Then comes one of the most shocking points Spencer raised. Certain individuals responsible for coordinating security and transportation for Diana were never fully questioned in public accounts. Staff members were either moved to different positions or quietly reassigned. Spencer began to piece together that the control of information wasn't accidental, it was strategic. Diana's fears weren't just about people. They were about a system of influence designed to keep certain truths hidden. And the tunnel itself, the infamous Pont de El Alma, was no ordinary location. Its design made escape impossible once the vehicle reached a certain speed. Security arrangements were known. The paparazzi were present. Emergency response times were slightly delayed. All small details, but combined, they formed a picture of vulnerability Diana had predicted in her letters. Spencer concluded that her fears were not only prescient but alarming in their accuracy. Yet here's the twist that connects directly to the next chapter. Spencer discovered evidence suggesting that someone with access to the palace, and therefore to knowledge about Diana's movements, may have influenced the route, the timing, or the chain of security decisions. The documents he found hinted at communications made during the hours preceding the crash, conversations never made public, and instructions that contradicted standard protocol. And the most terrifying part? Diana had feared exactly this kind of invisible orchestration. She had feared that someone within the palace, potentially connected to the people she distrusted most, had the power to place her exactly where she would be vulnerable, exactly when she would be most exposed. And what Spencer uncovered made it clear, these weren't coincidences. But what exactly happened inside the palace in those final hours, and how much of it was deliberate manipulation, would be explored in the next chapter. Because the biggest clue wasn't on the road. It wasn't the driver. It wasn't the car. It was inside the walls of the palace. And what Spencer discovered there would shock the world, and no one saw it coming. What if the most critical moment of that night, the night Princess Diana died, wasn't on the streets of Paris? What if it happened in a room hundreds of miles away, in a corridor of power, behind locked doors, over the telephone? Charles Spencer revealed something that would shock even those who have followed every conspiracy theory surrounding Diana's death. A phone call. Not casual. Not routine. Not mundane. A call that occurred during the very hours Diana was en route to the Pont de l'Alma tunnel. And the person on the other end was someone who had intimate access to the palace machinery. Someone with knowledge of Diana's movements. Someone with influence over the very decisions that affected her safety. Spencer didn't initially want to speak about it publicly. He hesitated, waited, and deliberated. But eventually, he confirmed that this call existed, and its implications were devastating. Let's rewind. Imagine the scene. A palace aide at a desk, phone in hand, tension thick in the room. Outside, the world is unaware. Inside, decisions are being made, instructions are given. The aide calls someone. It's brief, cryptic, urgent. And Spencer would later piece together the timing and context using records and private correspondence. The content of the call has never been released in full, but sources close to Spencer suggest it was a discussion about Diana's whereabouts, her schedule, and the measures, or lack thereof, being taken to ensure her safety. Ask yourself, why would anyone inside the palace feel the need to make such a call in those hours? Why not wait? Why not allow normal protocol to proceed? Spencer believes the answer lies in fear, control, and damage limitation. The person on the line wasn't calling to protect Diana. They were calling to manage the narrative, to ensure the next 48 hours would unfold in a way that minimized scrutiny and, most disturbingly, possibly to influence what Diana encountered on her journey. Charles Spencer recounted feeling a wave of shock when he realized this. Not because the call happened, but because it confirmed what Diana had feared all along. That her life was not entirely in her own hands. Diana had always been acutely aware of the invisible forces surrounding her. She noted them in diaries, letters, and private conversations. She had feared a network of influence capable of directing events in ways that could imperil her. And now, Spencer had evidence that such a network had been active the very night she was killed. But let's consider the psychological impact on Spencer. He had already read the letters. He had already analyzed the route. He had already connected the dots between her fears and the car, the driver, and the route to the tunnel. And now, this phone call confirmed something worse. The interference wasn't incidental. It was deliberate. Think about it. While Diana's car sped through Paris, someone with authority, someone trusted by the monarchy, was actively monitoring, coordinating, or influencing decisions related to her. And Spencer realized that this was no minor breach of protocol. It could have had life or death consequences. Now, there's a detail that often gets overlooked. The timing. The call happened at a moment when Diana's safety was most compromised. A window of vulnerability existed. The window where the paparazzi, the driver's condition, and the tunnel's design all converged. And within that window, someone inside the palace made a call. To whom? That remains unknown. But Spencer says that the implications are chilling. The call demonstrates a level of access and awareness that the official reports do not acknowledge. It also implies that decisions impacting Diana's safety were being made by individuals far removed from the immediate scene, but with potential consequences that reached directly into the car she was riding. Consider the emotional weight for Charles Spencer. His sister's life was ending, And he discovered, through letters, recordings, and corroborating sources, that people in positions of trust were engaged in conversations about her movements. Conversations that Spencer interprets as being about control, timing, and narrative management rather than protection.